Hey, what's happening with avian flu in cattle here in the United States? We had looked at those figures just 3 weeks ago, October 15th, 2024. At that time, when we looked at it, there were 320 herds in total that had been infected across the total United States. Between July 15th to October 15th, 90 days, 118 herds were infected. Between September and October, 112 new herds had been infected. Now, the majority of those herds were in California and Idaho. Those were the only two states reporting active infections. What's happened since then? Well, we're 3 weeks later, and we now have 442 confirmed cases, with the newest state entering the arena, which is Utah. And here's the thing. Those 442 cases in the last 3 weeks, that has been 122 new herds that have been infected. The Utah cases were all reported on October 31st, 2024. Okay, so where are these Utah cases happening? These infections are happening in Cache County, Utah, which is in northern Utah. What's important about that is on October 18th, one of the commercial chicken farms, so one of the CAFOs, reported avian flu in their chickens. The actual clade of avian flu hasn't been released. The question is this the clade that's in cattle? Because they do show that cattle can transmit this to chickens. What's important about that is this clade that's in cattle, they're not showing that this is coming from wild birds. In California, we were seeing some similar infections where avian flu shows up in cattle and then it starts showing up in commercial chicken farms. I had voiced some concerns in my last episode in October that it really doesn't look like industry is willing to be really open with the federal government and to work openly with the federal government. Now, why it's important to work with the federal government is because they have better labs and they have more resources. And right now, we don't understand how this avian flu is transmitting to cattle here in the United States when it's not transmitting anywhere else in the world. So no other country has avian flu in cattle except the United States. And then the next question is, why are we getting so many infections of avian flu in poultry? Because if you look at this globally, right now, the UK has reported one outbreak of avian flu. Italy has one outbreak of avian flu. We've already had 75 outbreaks this year. So what is happening here in the United States that we're doing differently? Why is it important to answer that question? It's important because on October 30th, 2024, a farm in Oregon, and this was a non-commercial farm, a pig tested positive for avian flu. Now, the USDA is not positive that this pig has a true infection in their lungs or if it was just contaminated in the nasal passages because the pig was sharing a facility with infected birds. So they're testing, the USDA is testing this pig and a couple other pigs from the farm to see if they had a true infection of avian flu in their lungs. Now, why this is important is because pigs are unique. They're this mixing vessel for animal viruses with our human influenza virus. So with our flu, and that mixing can change our influenza virus and create a whole new virus that can infect people. So we're going to have to wait to see what happens as the USDA researches these pigs further to see if they had the true avian infection in their lungs. The last part of this avian flu story is that it is jumping into people, with the first infection coming from cattle into people. Here in the United States, we've identified 44 cases of avian flu in people, with 19 of them coming from poultry and 24 of them coming from cattle. Now, 20 of those 44 cases came from California, with 3 of them just being reported today, Monday, November 4th. 44 cases in total, with 24 of them coming from infected cattle and 19 from poultry farms. The original infection of avian flu into humans happened in Texas from a dairy herd, from cattle. Granted, this infection right now has been mild, but there's no guarantee that it's always going to be mild. And here's the other thing. When we look at a region that reports avian flu in people, which is going to be the Western Pacific region, with the countries like China, Vietnam, this year in 2024, they've had 13 reported cases, with 10 of those 13 being in Cambodia, 1 in China, 1 in Australia, and 1 in Vietnam. So that's the number of cases that have been reported to the World Health Organization. If we compare that to what's been reported to the CDC, we have 44 cases in the United States, someplace where we have historically not had avian flu in people. There's a lot going on with avian flu here in the United States. It's transmitting faster and faster on a weekly basis. It's spreading faster. And how it's spreading, we don't really understand. I haven't seen any reports on how they think those cattle in Utah were infected. There's a couple big concerns with what's going on with avian flu in livestock. We know from the science right now that the cattle were not infected by wild birds, but we have a late breaking update from the USDA on the pigs that were assumed to be infected in Oregon. One of the pigs did come back. It tested positive for avian flu, and it tested positive for a D1 genome of the avian flu. Now, here's the deal. That's not the same genome that's in cattle. In cattle, it's a B3 genome. So unfortunately, these pigs, it looks like they were infected with a strain that comes from wild birds. Now, on this farm, the chickens actually were infected, and about 70 chickens needed to be euthanized. And the thought is that the pigs were probably infected from the poultry. And why that's the worst possible scenario is because, does that mean if there's pig farms next to poultry that get infected with avian flu that the pig farms now are all at risk? Yet still, we need to understand why the United States is the only country experiencing these types of infection in other livestock. Because of the rapid growth of these infections in our livestock and our inability to understand how that infection is really transmitting and why we're the only country in the world that has this, it seems that we're on this precipice of this huge outbreak into our food supply chain. And I don't know that for sure. It just seems that the USDA and industry has not been very transparent with what's happening. And because of that lack of transparency, it's really slowed the ability to address what's going on. And it's put industry and the USDA in this really bad situation. If they go for vaccines, will they tank the cattle industry here in the United States because other countries are not going to want those vaccinated cows because they're not going to be able to tell if the cow is infected with bird flu or if it's a vaccine? If this infection starts to explode, how is that going to impact our food supply chain in a world that's already having a difficult time feeding the number of people on our planet? I don't know. That's a lot of questions. I wasn't going to do another avian flu episode, except when I looked at the numbers today, I was surprised. And it appears it's transmitting faster and that it's getting much worse. Okay, until the next time, I will catch you on the other side.